You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo, bringing you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. Today, special guest, we have Jim Baumbach from Newsday, who had a very interesting story in the paper this week. And he's here to talk to us about it.
Yeah. Hi, Jim. Thanks for being Jim. With us.
Yeah, thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
And like Bill just mentioned, we know that you had that exclusive report in Newsday yesterday, Barriers to Badges. And basically the byline laid out a lot of what the meat of it was. Over 6,500 African-American candidates applied to the major LI police forces, and only 67 have been hired, apparently. So can you break that down a little bit more? I know there's a lot to it, and there has been already some reaction, both by Commissioner Ryder on some of his comments, which caught a lot of kind of flack, and also from the county on their response in terms of a panel. So thanks again, Jim.
Sure. So essentially, what this boiled down to is that, it was born out of one question, how diverse are Long Island's major police forces? And once we quickly got the answer, and it's not very. So then it becomes, well, why not? And, when you look at this, they've been under federal consent decrees for nearly 40 years to make it a far more equitable hiring process. And over those 40 years, many county executives and many police commissioners have said over and over, we're doing our best, we're trying to recruit, this is an issue we're trying to tackle. And that seemed to carry the day every time they would say that, but very little change happened over that time. So it led us to look at, well, let's get past the words, let's get past the intent and figure out what's happening once people do apply. Because what we did find was that the last two tests in both counties, they've got the people who applied essentially matched the diversity of the population. So therefore, if you have that population, matching the diversity, why is it not making its way through? And so we started looking at each step.
Wow. And certainly there was a lot uncovered, and it certainly is something that we recommend everyone read. I think, in terms of Newsday's the Watchdog series, there's always great work coming out from it. And, especially, we remember what happened with the LI divided reports. We see then hope that, this can be a part of making some of that actual policy change that hopes to make inroads and not have us kind of, like you said, kind of saying, well, this is the reality, but why? As much down the line. So can you talk a little bit about specifically also the comments? I know that caught a lot of, again, like I said, flack from the commissioner. I know there's a lot more to the report, but I know that was one of the main things focused on.
Yeah. So I met with both police commissioners and I gave them the findings and I gave them a chance to lay out what they have done, what they are doing, and what their reaction is to the findings. And Commissioner Ryder, when I met with him in October, he really, and the full video, the full video of the interview is on newsday.com, unedited, so you can see, exactly the entire context. And I know Ryder has said that himself, that he wants people to view the full context, and I would suggest that people do the same thing. He really wanted to focus on that they get the diversity to sign up for the test, but minorities do not show up on test day at far greater rates than whites. And that was something that he was really, bothered by. And that was what he wanted to focus on. And you'll see from my questions that I was more interested in the process. So in explaining that, I asked him to, have you done any studies into that? Why is that? And he several times throughout the interview mentioned that, there's no one pushing the kids at home. They don't have mom and dad. Look, a lot of these kids from these communities come from broken homes. Kind of generalizations about minority communities that gives a portrayal that really the civil rights leaders were really offended by, and that really put Ryder in a tough spot these last couple of days. And I should mention, we did go back to him on Tuesday before we went to publish this, told him, gave him the full rundown of what he had said and the reaction from the civil rights leaders. He did agree to meet with us on camera later that day to talk through it. And then about an hour or two later, he canceled that interview and gave a statement through the county executive's office, essentially saying that he is committed to police diversity and he meant no harm with his comments.
Yeah, fascinating. Definitely. It's interesting to see, that he was so comfortable to volunteer that type of comment. Like you said, the generalizations, which do obviously harken back to some kind of stereotypes about cultures of minority groups. And, we've had the commissioner on before in the past number of times. And, he's really spoke about, and the county executive, the school, Nassau Community College, being a big part of trying to change this and get more minority enrollment, drawing from the commuter students from Long Island and things like that. But yeah, even when we spoke with him in the past, there are certain things where I don't know, if it's just kind of a naivete or whatever that, and again, he's the commissioner, so I don't know how much he should be afforded in that sense, but of speaking kind of off the cuff, and kind of having a little bit more of that, rank and file kind of vocabulary and vernacular, which certainly doesn't, kind of test or get the same kind of reaction that it would from members of the larger community, let alone, members of like the NAACP and these other advocacy organizations out on Long Island. So again, yeah, just your thoughts, just having seen this kind of play out, did that catch you by surprise? Like you said, that he kind of volunteered that kind of justification?
As a journalist, you want people to be honest and to not be reading from a script. And Ryder yesterday said, "Look, I speak from the heart. I speak from. I don't use a script. So I mean, I welcome his honesty. To whether it's offensive, I would definitely, turn to the civil rights leaders and the people of those communities. At the end of the day, those are the ones who decide whether this is offensive or not. And clearly the leaders of those communities, including elected officials, now not all of them called for him to resign or be dismissed, but most of them, if not all of them, did say that they were offended by these use of stereotypes and this portrayal of the communities in this manner.
Okay. Yep. No, that's definitely good context. And like I said, we appreciated the candidness. And like I said, especially when I know you interview lots of folks, a lot of people are not so candid when it comes to reporters like yourself who are so capable of getting to the core of the stories. But it is pretty interesting. And to flesh it out, then what happened after that. So there was a bit of an apology from him. Is that correct? Afterwards, right?
Yeah. So in his initial statement, he just said he didn't mean any harm by his comments. And then yesterday, after the story was published, he was at two public appearances alongside County Executive Laura Curran, in which he was asked about it, and he said that he meant no harm. If anyone was offended, I apologize for that. I speak from the cuff. I speak, he didn't mean to paint people in that manner. Yeah. I did speak to some people afterwards. They were not too excited about the apology because they felt like he wasn't owning the portrayal. It was more, well, I didn't mean any harm by this. So, I mean, at that point, you get into the semantics of it. But yes, he did offer an apology for it and said he meant no harm. Whether that's, good enough for those communities, time will tell.
Of course. And definitely want to remind our listeners that are listening to This Week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully with Newsday's reporter, Jim Baumbach, who, again, is reporting on this very important story. So in terms of then also what the county announced, that there is going to be some kind of panel now, and I know Suffolk was looking into their hiring practices. Could you also let our listeners know about what that decision was?
Sure. I'll start from Suffolk, which is easier. Steve Ballone was quiet yesterday, did not offer a statement. We asked for one, declined to give one. And the police department did say, we're going to look at every single step of the process and try to make it equitable. And the former commissioner, Geraldine Hart, had already been in the process of doing that as well. In Nassau, they took a different approach. They created this diversity committee that's going to focus on police hiring. It's basically going to look at it from a three-prong approach, looking at recruitment, looking at the testing process, and looking looking at officers once they get into the academy and on the job. And in a way, it's a different approach. A lot of approaches have been made over the last 40 years, and they acknowledge that it has not worked. And Nassau in particular, since this last test, they've hired something like 281 officers, and they are 86 point something percent white, which is almost exactly in line with what their sworn force is right now at 86 point something percent white. So that tells you it's not going to change in the next 4 years next 2 years until this next test occurs. So obviously something needs to change. So that the fact that they're looking at that, you can look at it, glass half full, glass half empty. You can look at it as, they've had a lot of approaches in 40 years and nothing's changed. You can look at it the flip side, that they're trying something new, and let's see what they come up with it. But they are trying something different with this committee, and they're looking at beyond just recruiting, which is what most of the approaches in the last 40 years have been.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And
Right.
Bill, I definitely want to get your thoughts as well, but just maybe tying it back then to, and again, I know you guys did a very thorough, deep data set kind of investigation. I think it was, over 70,000, if I'm not mistaken, police candidates that you guys had looked at in terms of this data set. But coming back to, if it's not, those other kind of generalizations that are these barriers, but I know you wrote a lot about the psychological test, the physical test, and the written test, and how those could be these barriers to access, and specifically the maybe involvement of third parties in the kind of the oversight and administering of that. Could you speak about that?
Sure. So part of the issue here is that this process involves various levels of government, different divisions, and outside companies, private companies. That the written test is done by private companies that the counties contract with, and with the oversight of the Justice Department. Both counties say they have very little say in how this goes. You get to the physical fitness test. It's these really precise standards. They're set by the state, and then it's up to the counties on how they enforce it. And I think we'd all agree there should be some standards, but when you have such standards that are so precise, that perhaps gives people who have family members on the force already to give them basically an ability to get coached for the test, that offers another barrier for people who don't have family members, and clearly minorities do not have family members on it. And then you go to the background search, the psychological. In Suffolk County, they use a firm based in Georgia who contract with local psychologists, 2 local ones, and we found there that from the last cycle, black candidates were eliminated at nearly 3 times the rate of white candidates. So there's a significant barrier there. And these are candidates who have made it through several steps of the process to get to that point. This should, one expert said this should be the cream of the crop candidates, and they're still getting knocked out at 3 times the rate of whites. So there's just a lot of these different barriers, and it's a challenge. I get it for the counties, because there's a lot of moving parts, and there's not one person to say, fix this. You have to go to each side. So that's definitely an obstacle.
Wow.
Certainly, well, it almost appears systemic, and wow, how do you unravel that with so many ingredients?
Especially in the context of Executive Order 203, and obviously all the discussion around police reform now, just having passed a year since the murder of George Floyd, and what that obviously sparked in a social movement nationwide and here on Long Island around police reform. It certainly is a lot to unpack, and we certainly are grateful for you, Jim, and for your colleagues over at Newsday for obviously staying on this, and we're grateful for our time when we do speak with the commissioner and with the other entities involved for really just trying to get this all kind of moving in a better direction for everyone, and certainly addressing some of these realities of the past. So thank you so much, Jim, for your time. We just want to remind everyone to follow his reporting, of course, in Newsday, to subscribe, and to also you can also follow him on social media at Jim Baumbach, last name, on Twitter, and I'm sure a number of other places to catch where he is at in his reporting in the moment. So thank you so much, Jim. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
A lot to digest. It was kind of like the LI divided. Like I said, I think it'll have some long-term effects, hopefully for the better. And it's not a matter of to throw stones or to, cast aspersions on any one particular individual, or even, like Jim said, one specific government entity, because there are a lot of moving pieces. And you can't just say, go to one person, hey, fix this, because if we could, then hopefully we would have already, so
I was, I learned something here today too. I didn't realize that there were so many outside entities that were actually involved in the hiring process, or, just getting into the police department. I read in his article, some guys would get disqualified because of on the physical fitness test, because apparently they didn't do a sit-up correctly.
Yeah, that's what he was saying, where there's this kind of subjectivity to this objective standard, which some might find as, a little bit arbitrary to begin with. I get the idea. We obviously want to have folks who are, physically capable, who, to an extent, depending on what their job is. Again, also, having the mental fitness to, do the job. People talk about psychological evaluations and stuff like that. But, it definitely does make you scratch your head when this is the outcome. And, I don't know if it's a go back to the drawing board kind of situation, or, kind of constantly keep tweaking, because as he had mentioned, this dissent decree from 40 years ago, when things were even worse, we have seen thankfully progress, but at the same time, it's certainly at a very slow pace.
I think that's 40 years is a pretty damning indictment. And look, we've seen it with every time some issue comes up in, federally, what's the first thing we do? Well, we're going to appoint a commission, and that keeps everybody off your back for a few months or a few years, depending on what the commission comes up with, but it starts to just feel like a ploy. Come on, do we really need it? How about the Civilian Complaint Review Board?
Again, I think it goes back to these conversations, like you had referenced off air earlier with Michael O'Keefe and, his reporting. And again, the commissioner and the county executive are fully aware and cognizant of it. And they are, trying, they're saying the right things. And in theory, they're doing some of the, right things at the least. But when it comes to the cultural kind of dynamics between still law enforcement and, for that matter, government to an extent, with certain communities, there is a kind of gap in trust, and it I think would be naive to think that it doesn't have some relation to what we see in the media in terms of these incidents that happen with killings, that have these kind of questions hanging around them of wrongdoing and all these other matters. So it is not an easy thing to, I think, overcome, but certainly I think we can all do a little bit better. And I think, again, we like the commissioner, and I think he realized that, even if his heart, which nobody I think questions, is in the right place, he can probably be a little bit more kind of sensitive with his words, knowing that people listen to him, that he does have a big impact, not just in the law enforcement community, obviously, but across all of Nassau County and Long Island larger, for his role in the police department here. So very fascinating stuff, Bill. We will certainly keep track of how that develops.
Well, now we're very happy to be joined by Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre, a Democrat who since 2014 has represented the 11th Assembly District, which covers portions of Long Island from East Massapequa out to Deer Park. Assemblywoman Jean-Pierre is currently the chair of the Assembly Committee on Libraries and Education Technology, as well as a member of important committees, including the Education, Banks, and Committee on Children and Families. And we thank you for coming and joining us today. I know you're busy, but we do appreciate it.
Definitely.
Well, thank you for having me. It's definitely been a interesting 2020, but I'm looking forward to the new norm.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. It's Memorial Day weekend. We know a lot of people, even though the weather might not be as great as we want, will be hopefully trying to enjoy it the best they can with their families in a better kind of dynamic than we had last year. So let's start with that, as we do like to with guests we've had on for the first time, Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre, with your experience governing during COVID, and we know that you had a very personal experience with it too, being one of the earliest legislators who actually contracted the COVID virus. So could you lay out to our listeners, kind of, or encapsulate that crazy last year and a half from your end?
Yes, definitely crazy is the right word. And a lot of uncertainty. So I just remember, session starting, everyone getting excited for the new year, 2020. And I went to Israel during our break, and I'm a member of the Black Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus, and we had our association weekend. And then when I came back, I went back to Albany, and we were discussing, COVID happening, and there were 1 or 2 cases. We were discussing testing. I just remember being in conference with 107 members talking about this virus. And then one of my colleagues who, I saw in passing, we chatted, and she was diagnosed with the virus. And then boom, I got real sick, and I was told I couldn't take the test because I wasn't eligible. I didn't have test positive for strep nor flu. And then it got scary. My whole entire family, my household had it. And trying to navigate COVID on a public servant and also on a personal level was extremely hard. And I commend my staff for stepping in on the public side while I dealt with the uncertainty in my own home. So it was definitely I don't wish on my worst enemy.
Yeah. And you have a very important perspective, having had, dealt with it personally, and how that I'm sure informs, both constituent services, obviously the need for a lot of different social programs. We saw a lot of unemployment, the other kind of effects from the virus too. But also, dealing with the vaccine distribution and still some hesitancy in certain communities. So I guess we can go to that I guess we'll go there now. In terms of maybe combating, vaccine hesitancy in young people in communities of color. I know you had I believe a forum with a Suffolk County legislator, and in addition with the Suffolk County Health Commissioner and some other medical health professionals. So can you talk about, how, again, your perspective of actually having had it, makes you an advocate for folks to get that vaccine and be safe?
Absolutely. So just a step before the forum, when we did the rollout, I was very concerned about making sure that the rollout of the vaccine was not the same as the rollout of the COVID testing.
True.
Because communities of color, communities who are less fortunate, who don't have access to transportation, were the ones who were left behind in getting access to COVID-19. And that's why you saw high numbers in particular communities of low-income communities who had high numbers of being diagnosed with COVID, the virus, because the accessibility was one to get the testing, and language, being able to let people know what quarantine means, how you should quarantine. And that language was not readily, I think this pandemic has taught us as government what we need to do and how we need to prepare.
Definitely. And the infection rate, too, I think that's a very important point, especially with essential workers. We saw that a lot of times there was these kind of racial dynamics, that certain workforces, weren't afforded the luxury of being able to stay home. They were folks that we relied on, whether they're EMS or working at your supermarket or anywhere else that, like you said, that maybe some of their other counterparts didn't afford. So that's a great point. But then now, thankfully, knowing that we have moved on from those really bad, ugly days of last year. And, we know that the infection rate, I think in Nassau County was about 7 days, where, we had seen really positive numbers under, I think, 1% now. And, we definitely are in a better place, but, we still aren't all the way back, but we know the vaccine has had a big role in us getting to where we're at. So again, I guess how that plays into it.
And just as we started to discuss opening, maybe just a few months ago, opening different parts of the state, the Long Island legislators met, particularly Suffolk County, and Long Island was the highest in the state, while the state was getting its numbers down and maintaining, and people were out. And so that's why it's so important that we build that herd immunity and people get vaccinated. My office was the vaccine sign up. So, and we're very proud that I'm very proud of my staff that they turned themselves into first, on the ground respondents and responding to whatever urgency at the moment
Putting out the fires, right? Putting out the fires.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them. I definitely know, to be honest, I'm in constituent services myself, and I know those UI cases and all these other things. Like you said, they certainly can be overwhelming at times, but it's, along with yourself, the staff that can help provide some level of support and give people a sense of confidence. At least someone's trying to help them in a very vulnerable time. So that is important to mention. And let's then maybe segue towards another thing, which plays a big role in the recovery. And we know you've had legislation out there in terms of trying to, have some certain benefits for small businesses, but also in terms of the state budget, which obviously passed, which had a lot of funding for very important things. Of course, libraries, which we do want to hear your thoughts on, you being obviously the chair of that committee, seeing a lot of good funding going that way. But in terms of the other things, education and these other programs, can you talk a little bit about why the budget, and how it helps your constituents and Long Islanders?
Sure. I mean, small businesses had to take funds to, make sure we have PPEs and now, we're telling small businesses that people who are vaccinated don't have to wear a mask, and, who's going to be charged to ensure that small businesses can have someone to check people's vaccine cards, or businesses in general. But the budget I'm very proud of. We did an extremely great budget, providing nonprofit who do so much with so little prior to the pandemic. The funds, these CBOs are so critical to the growth of our community. And we've seen, as we thought with the COVID-19, a lot of these nonprofits thought they were going to go away because there were no dollars. The state was Suffolk County is in a deficit. So I'm very proud of our budget. Our schools, going virtually, having to buy Chromebooks for every student is key. Making sure teachers who are remote, providing them the resources to provide them to teach remotely. People who don't have reliable internet access. So the budget was a really good budget. It gave school districts a really good advantage. And I'm hoping that we can, we're going to fully fund foundation aid. And in the next 3 years, school districts we're going to be in a better place. I have my district is very diverse, where we have some districts who does very well other than other districts and it's, the way we fund education, we need to really look at that. So.
Of course, especially, knowing your role on the Committee for Children and Families, knowing that libraries play an integral part of that public education kind of system. And to that point, specifically to libraries, I think the budget was able to restore some of those potential cuts that were expected.
Yes.
I think be
right.
Yep.
So I think last year we were at 14 million for capital funds, and we were able to go back to 2 years ago where we're at 35 million. And can you just think of over 700 library systems having to share $14 million?
Yeah.
Not even 35, not even 35 is adequate for our library systems. Our library systems are so outdated, and having to transform from in-person to remotely, that costs dollars. Technology is not cheap. And to be able to provide content, and, a lot of libraries are doing so much, providing, stuff for our seniors, our schools. They're very supportive for our schools. Our seniors can't go into senior centers. So that social interaction they look forward to online, and how do we teach them? So there's just so much that libraries play. They're the hub of our community. I grew up in a public library. That was my Saturday thing to go. It was a thing to do after school, and kids still do it. Parents, it's not only for kids, it's jobs, it's GED trainings, vocational training. So we need to provide libraries with the funding. And some libraries, I have one in my district who can't open, so we really need to look the way, how we fund libraries.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I think most people can get behind. Like you said, knowing that they're not just a place that you get books, which is obviously an important service, but there's so many other community aspects, the ones that you mentioned. And like you said, especially with the need for Wi-Fi, which some people take for granted that everyone has, but doesn't. I know I saw one of the libraries, putting out a reminder that, we still have free Wi-Fi and, folks, especially on a nice day, maybe you can come sit on a bench if you want to be outside, or if you want to come inside, of course, to use the computer for, like you said, those other services, that they are a vital resource that we all should want to support. So that's great to know. And let's remind our listeners that they are listening to This Week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and again, thankfully joined by Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre. So that makes sense. That's a lot of the highlights from the budget. There were some other things in the budget that obviously some people heralded and some people are a little bit less kind of in favor of, we'll say, in terms of the passage of recreational marijuana and what that means for Long Island. So I know, you've laid out, I think, your position and you see a lot of the positives of the criminal reform kind of aspects of it. So can you lay out, I guess, maybe your thoughts on where we stand with this now?
I think it's a long time running. I think the sponsor did an incredible job. Crystal Peoples-Stokes was also our majority leader, and she's from Buffalo, and I think she took her time to meet with advocates, to meet with law enforcement and the caucus, to meet with small businesses, our unions. There's like 10 different licenses going to be offered through recreational marijuana. Marijuana has plagued Black and Brown communities far too long. And this gives people an opportunity, a second chance. There's no reason why someone who's caught with a small amount of marijuana, that their life is ruined, that they can't get a job, that they can't attend a university. And because, they can, but there's a process for that, right? Yeah. And sometimes most of the times they're denied. So there's a second chance. This is a second chance to be able to turn your life around, but also to be an owner, right? To be an owner and to be a productive member in this, my baby, sorry, to be a productive member in the society. It's just so critical. And the other part is so we can clear the Black market. What people are smoking in the Black market and what they're intaking in their body is dangerous.
Unregulated.
Yes, this allows us to regulate it. And if someone who does it in the Black market is going to do it regardless, whether this bill is here or not. But let's make sure that they're putting something that's safe in their body, and then there's a little tax revenue for local municipalities, and they can put that money towards drug addiction. They can put that money towards so many youth programs, prevention, awareness, education.
That's a good point.
It's a long time coming. Yeah, you know what? I spoke to a local vape shop owner here who is, I guess he's attempting to get on the list or whatever to sell recreational marijuana. There are quite a few hurdles. One of them is, I think he said to me that to start out, he had to put $250,000 in an account to show that, he was viable, I guess, financially. Mm-hmm. And then he also said later on down in the process, he had to put $500,000 in an account and not touch it, so as to prove to who's ever doing the licensing thing that he didn't need that money. And he had to get 7 doctors have to sign on. It just seemed like, oh my God, so we're really not going to have any recreational marijuana facilities on Long Island, because this seems to be almost impossible to get over.
Well, there certainly is going to be a process that, other states have had. And I know there have been issues, but, obviously it's about trying to make it as manageable and navigate it as accessibly as possible. But also, I know there's been a pushback by some of the towns to put in their own types of policy. We talked with Town of Oyster Bay Supervisor Saladino. We talked to other individuals, who see, zoning kind of statutes to give them some kind of jurisdictional kind of flexibility and things like that. But I guess back to Bill's initial point, in terms of, how we address and not just mirror some of the other policies in other states, that maybe make progress, but, kind of avoid some of those pitfalls, especially wanting to have more minority involvement in these industries, knowing how much, like you said, that they have negatively impacted them, Assemblywoman.
Well, there's going to be a office of cannabis management that people are looking forward to be on. There's going to be a task force. They're the ones that's going to construct and manage some of the policies and then make sure enforcement, work with our local municipalities. So that's still in the works. So this is still freshly new, and not to say we're not going to make any mistakes. Of course, anything new, we can make mistakes, but we just have to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah, and there's room for amendments and other things like that, of course, as well. And maybe back to another point, just to finish up this topic. I know you had sponsored, I believe, a piece of legislation. I think it was A01779, which related to the expungement of previous convictions for certain kind of more low level of marijuana offenders. So can you talk about that and why that also plays into this larger, kind of dynamic?
That just goes back to what I said earlier, was, giving people that second chance, and people shouldn't be criminalized because especially young people, because they made a mistake. I mean, before I ran, I was the director of the Wyandanch Community Resource Center, and one of these small level crimes hindered people. And when they go into the workforce and they hear no, it's just and you're surrounded by lack of resources. That your sense of hope is gone down, and the morality has gone down. So we just need to open doors for people and allow people to be productive citizens. Let's fund education. Let's fund programs, and not open bigger jails and bigger prisons, and mental health. Let's, provide mental health resources in our communities, because I can tell you, TPSD is running rampant in communities that are low income, that don't have resources, don't have access to quality resources. It's ramping wild. And we need to make sure we fund those quality, and not just care, but quality care.
Yeah, exactly. That definitely is an important distinction. Let's remind our listeners, they are listening to This Week's Online News, 90.3 WHPC. Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and still again with Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre. And maybe segueing to somewhat related, police reform as an important topic. And we just spoke with a Newsday reporter who had this big investigative piece, which spoke about the hiring practices in Long Island and some of the data, which was a bit, concerning, and some of the comments made by some of the commissioners as well on the topic, caught a bunch of press. So can you talk about, maybe just your thoughts overall on where the Executive Order 203 reforms kind of stand and where Long Island kind of is in this process?
Perfect timing for this interview with what's happening in Nassau County.
Yep.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, people who wear uniforms are people. Yeah. When we go to work, we go to serve the public. And one thing I always say is, I've been in office for 7 years. And when I first got elected, it was during the Shelley Silver days. Mm-hmm. And we created so many legislation around corrupt legislators. And I was okay with it, because I know that I'm not corrupt, and I'm okay to provide transparency for my constituents, and to ensure that, that my constituents can feel comfortable that when I go to Albany, that I'm serving them and I'm doing the right thing. So transparency is key, and it should be in any public position you serve. And I don't think anyone should have any questions around reforms when it comes to transparency. And that transparency goes to the reason why we don't have diverse police force, because people of color are turned off by, of becoming a police officer if we don't create those transparencies, if we don't create accountability. My daughter, I was just talking, she's 5, and her police interaction is so positive. She loves, because you know why? When we create these events, we create these opportunities. She goes around, and the police officers, they come with the explorers. She loves cops. Whereas if I went to a career day at a public school, and I was talking to this 5th grader, and his first interaction was a raid in his home, right? He's the victim. And his first interaction with a police officer is taking away a family member, and he saw a weapon. The trauma that he is going to have if it's not dealt with is going to turn negative. So we want to make sure we have to look at this reform holistically. It's being inclusive. It's making sure the force is inclusive, making sure the policies are fair, where we have police officers not only as patrol, but as sergeants, as lieutenants, and the high-ranking positions, that when they go into our communities, that our young people can see them. They can talk to them. They can have conversations with them. That's one. And making sure when someone does something that they're held accountable for it. And and I sometimes feel like it's the police officers who are versus the union police officers. It's a two different dynamic. I deal with police officers and I talk to them all the time, and they're like, they're so tired of this. Let's just get the reform done and allow us to be safe when we're out there. Because it's not safe. It's not safe for anyone, because we're not having real conversations. It's like in an antagonist, and it shouldn't be, because police officers, we need them. We need them, and we need each other.
Yeah, of course. I think that is a very excellent, explanation, and definitely, the fact that these aren't abstract situations. These are our lives. These are our communities, and knowing this dynamic, which according, to the report, which there was a consent decree 40 years ago, and seeing that there has been some progress made, but at a very slow pace, it does go to those other kind of conversations of this cultural kind of dynamic. And if there isn't the trust built, and if there isn't, the positive interactions, then how can we kind of really expect a much different outcome, unfortunately? So certainly, knowing, again, that reporting of, they put about over 6,500 Black applicants at the 2 PDs out here on Long Island, and only 67 of them apparently were hired. I certainly think that that everyone can do better. And we've spoken with Police Commissioner Ryder in the past, and they feel that the Nassau Community College campus having their new training, facility will hopefully make a big difference. But like you said, I think those other kind of micro things really are just as important in turning this kind of tide and getting, like you said, the kind of community engagement or community kind of reality that we all want. Like you said, and not just kind of talking in circles and, not getting to the root causes of these actual problems, because I think it benefits everyone, as you just laid out very eloquently. So thank you for that. Bill, did you have more thoughts on that specifically, or also just the larger kind of context of police reform? I know you also kind of raised a bit of the qualified immunity conversation. And I know the discussion, like you said, where if that's what could be afforded for legislators, who are civil servants, then maybe why not for also law enforcement as important civil servants?
I'm curious. I know both departments, I believe, they're really fighting the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board idea, tooth and nail. And that, to me, it just doesn't. It kind of shows me, I don't know if it's really intent, but it just doesn't smell good. Why,
It doesn't smell good. It don't taste good.
No.
Yeah, right. It doesn't look good either. The optic.
The other thing I that I always bring up, and I bristle when I think about this, is that $3,000 payment for officers to wear cameras in Nassau County. That's working. It's going to work out to about $7.2 million a year, because they want that $3,000 for every year they wear the camera, not just a one-time payment. I still don't know where that's going to go.
Yeah, well, again, we're good to see that the body cameras are getting rolled out. But like you said, I know a lot of law enforcement, personally, and they see it as a benefet. They see it maybe as a flip side, as it gets them out of potential litigation too. But again, like you said, having an accurate record of what's going on with audio and video.
But there are also other implications, though, as to how police officers act when they are aware that these cameras are on. You saw the case of the guy up in, I think it was in Albany, or it was upstate, the guy that got pushed by the cop. And
in Buffalo.
Was it Buffalo? Okay. So the guy got pushed by the cop, and another cop walking along there initially was going to attempt to help that guy, and somebody else told him, get back in line and you keep marching. Those are implications on a video that somebody knew this was wrong. Nobody said a word, so that there's...
But that's why the footage comes out, and then people can see it and make their own kind of determination about it. So
but
there's a lot of things.
I think it will exonerate as many officers as it will indict in that sense. You know,
absolutely. There's more good officers than there are bad officers.
Of course.
Exactly right.
You know, but one thing people do say, and I totally 100% agree, is if I walk by and I see someone doing something and I don't say anything, I don't do anything, I'm just as guilty.
Yeah.
I'm just as guilty. Let me go.
Silence.
Let me, you know, as a civilian, let me go get help. Let me leave and go get help. But as an officer, if you're with your partner and, you know, sometimes come on, Millie, chill. You see it in Law and Order. All right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You do it, Ellie. Calm down, you know? So,
yeah.
you know?
There was a big case in Buffalo, I know, where an officer had intervened and tried to stop someone who she saw as being too aggressive and harming, you know, the person who was already incarcerated. And they, you know, disbarred her from the enforcement. You know, she lost her pension and everything. But thankfully, it was recently decided that she actually would be given, you know, that full-time kind of serve. So it's good to see that, maybe hopefully life can imitate art for the better ways, like you just referenced, than sometimes the other way. So another point, though, maybe just to segue and still related to, you know, the kind of concepts of concerns about discrimination. I know you sponsored some legislation that's related to real estate discrimination, especially in the wake of the LI Divided report. I believe some legislation that's sponsored in the Senate by Kevin Thomas, maybe that you're also on as well, from the Assembly side. So can you talk about, you know, similar to how this reporting creates policy, you know, for law enforcement, I guess, around housing? Can you talk about that as well? Why that's important for Long Islanders?
Yes, sure. So, you know, Newsday did this 25-page report on housing discrimination and pointed out some of the bad actors and, you know, and how they were run and the reason why where we are today, we're so segregated on Long Island. We knew that before the article, but the article allowed us to have a kaleidoscope on things, allowed us to, you know, really hone down and visually see these actors and put it out more publicly. So my legislations allow to looks at it holistically. You know, if you're a bad actor, you shouldn't have a license, like, period. You shouldn't. You should your license should be taken away. And there's so many organizations. I have one that will the fines and that the brokers and the agents will pay will go to the state, and a portion of it will go to organizations like Erase Racism, who has been in the trenches fighting housing discrimination, and allow them to apply for funding as a funding stream for these organizations to continue to do the great work that they do. And then it's the other one, the removal of your license, and then the hours of cultural competence. You know, when you're taking these courses, you should have knowledge of cultural competence. You know, we talk about any profession, especially if you're serving in a community that you never had any relations to, there should be a cultural competence, you know, and you shouldn't be navigating one person to another community because the color of their skin. You know? That's illegal. Those are against, you know, human rights law. So they should be held accountable for their actions. And that's why we have impoverished school districts on Long Island, you know, or even out, you know, that's why we have this whole red gerrymandering. You know, we split these communities and we, you know, put this bunch here, put that bunch there, you know, so.
That's a very good point. You know, obviously there's the history and context of redlining and these other racial steering policies that, you know, are banned by federal law, but, you know, there still can be things that are kind of skirting around it. And that's really important to point out how much it impacts, you know, census data, and then therefore impacts, you know, elected kind of officials, districts, and those lines, exactly how they're drawn in the representation.
That's why it's so key that we have a diverse legislature, that people can come together and learn from one another as legislators and support bipartisan, common sense, moving forward. Let's leave that in the past legislation and let's move forward to progressive, inclusive policies so all Americans, and we can leave, we talk about marijuana and how lack of resources in some communities, that all folds in housing discrimination, how people live. If you think about if you have a child, you fast cash, you're selling on the street, you're selling in the black market. There's no access to adequate care. Some kids go to school, don't have breakfast. It's just holistically, and people don't even think about, like you wake up, you have Wi-Fi. Not everyone has Wi-Fi, Why don't you have Wi-Fi?
Exactly. No, exactly. There's a lot of those good questions that it's good to see that, you're asking up there in Albany. And, I know a lot of folks are thinking about, like you said, those community-based organizations. And, I know we only have a little bit more time left here with you, but we did want to segue just in those moments to some of that common sense legislation that we know that you've also supported and that I think a lot of people can get behind, regardless of party affiliation. I know Bill has one in mind specifically about the lemonade stands as well.
I love that one. I love that one.
Oh, no, who wouldn't? Of course.
And as soon as I read it,
they're so cute.
Yeah, exactly.
As soon as I read that, I said, oh, great. So I'm not going to be reading any more stories about a bad guy closing down the lemonade stand on some little kid who's just trying to make a couple of bucks to go to the movies. No
sad TikToks of somebody crying on the corner, hopefully. So hopefully we can see traction for that. But another one that also speaks to Bill's heart as a musician and having been an educator as well is, I believe, AO 1788, which would add art and music education as a common school branch to be incorporated more into the curriculum. So can you talk about maybe things like that, how hopefully, we can see cross-party kind of unity and getting types of legislation across the line like that?
Sure. My daughter's 5 and she's like, Mommy, can we have a lemonade stand? So I told her we can, as long as you come up with a good idea where we're going to give the money to.
Yep. And once my bill passes.
Yeah.
Right.
And the second, arts in music required in our schools. Some districts, that's the first that they cut, and you look at communities and kids, their mental health can be through music, expressing your emotion through music. My daughter is in dance, she's part of the Venettes, which is big here on Long Island. And she loves to dance and kids love, we think about our Deputy Police Commissioner Risco mentioned Lewis. They did a survey in Wyandanch and 2 things that kids love was cooking. They wanted to be a chef and music. So they have a music studio. They have cooking classes and they have a music studio in the youth center. And
that's great.
And the first thing we cut in school is music, arts.
Yeah.
And how kids can learn through music and arts.
Yeah. And
there goes my son. He's
singing in the background.
There's a great quote that I always remember from and it was Winston Churchill. During wartime, his advisors had told him, we need more money for the war effort. So we're going to cut arts and music from all of the programs that we have. Mm-hmm. And Churchill turned around and looked at him and said, wait a minute, you're going to cut the arts and the music? He said, what are we fighting for?
No, exactly.
And you just say, and you're right, though. Every time a budget gets kiboshed, we're going to cut the arts and the music. And
there's a push for STEM, but I know people have wanted to add STEAM now, to add arts into that as the essential kind of topics. I guess to your point, Assemblywoman, but and just seeing, to your other comment, Bill, that coming back from the pandemic, and I know some have phrased it as a war, that knowing that students, especially those who haven't been able to do in-person learning, the community that's built around, whether it's the dance club or, being in the band at school or all these other types of art kind of programs that are extracurriculars, they are certainly essential, to building kind of well-rounded students and giving them the opportunities that they want, even if it's just as a hobby or, to maybe excel professionally. And so that's certainly.
Have you heard of the Copeg choir? I don't know or the Central Islip choir?
I know there's some good ones out there. I know they're doing some big things. The Central Islip is not in my district, but they're phenomenal. They travel all over.
Yeah, that's great.
The Copeg band, they play in the Macy's Day Parade. I believe they went to Washington for Obama.
Wow.
So I mean, if we cut those are opportunities that some children never leave Long Island. never leave never have gotten on a Long Island Railroad.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a big point. People think about that in New York City, where people don't leave their area.
People never been to New York City.
No, it's a very good point. And we don't like we want to see more. Again, kind of cross-county travel, and we want to see people get that full experience of living in New York and all it has to offer. And a big part of that, of course, is the arts community. So that's certainly great. We'll keep an eye on that, of course. And we only have a few moments.
Every one of our guests, you will come back if we ask you to come on the air, because
you guys are fun.
Appreciate it. No, I know it's nice and early, and appreciate your energy at this time of the day.
Definitely.
Obviously, there's always a lot more to talk about. There's a couple of bills I know that certainly have gotten press. And I just in the closing thoughts, I do want to get your thoughts on, again, having been the sponsor of the Brianna's Law and this being Memorial Day's weekend. Safety around boating and just in general, kind of during Memorial Day weekend. But I just wanted to ask real quick, and I don't want to get into a larger conversation in terms of, your vote explanation, but I know there was a specific piece of legislation regarding education around the Holocaust that I know there've been a lot of press kind of around. And is that something that you think, you'd come back to the table about? Because I know there's a lot of noise about it, and it's just trying to make sense of it for our listeners, because I know it seems to still be going to another committee. So could you just maybe quickly, just if you think that there is potential of that still in this session?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'll be quick. So I just want to give a shout out to Gina Lilac, who is Brianna's mother, and she utilized her courage to save so many families on the waterways. And we passed that. And as we go into the weekend, don't operate a power vessel if you're drinking. Don't. It's just stupid. Yep, let's save people's lives. And as far as, holding, I didn't vote negative on the bill. The chair had asked to hold the bill and to have more discussion about the bill. So I voted with the chair to hold the bill, not to vote. I went to Israel. I think it's a beautiful country. I learned, I went through the Museum of the Holocaust and just hearing children's name. But things need to be comprehensive. We talk about slavery. We talk about we shouldn't be doing one or the other. We should be doing all of it.
Amen to that. That is a very good point. I know there's a lot of discussion about Asian Americans, and like you said, about all these histories should be taught in their full complexity, both for the ugliness and the beauty of us kind of overcoming and coming together around them. Yes. So thank you so much again, Kimberly, Assemblywoman Kimberly Jean-Pierre. We really, really, really appreciate your time, and of course that message to everyone to be safe this Memorial Day weekend. And we hope you have a great one with you and your family and your lovely children that we hear in the background. And you just take care. Have a great rest of your session, and we look.
We'll be talking to you soon.
Okay, likewise. Thank you.
We hope.
Take care. Be well.
Yes,
Thanks
of
again.
course.
Be well.
Please.
Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, Bill.
The clock on the wall says we got to move on out of here, John.
Very
does. Good show.
Yeah.
You got a lot of stuff in there today.
A lot of breaking news. Happy Memorial Day to everyone. Enjoy the long weekend. We'll be back next weekend with a lot more content, and just appreciate
it. Right back here, same time, same place on 90.3 WHPC.